The following story has curse words that are unbeeped. Underground by Daniel Morris. You know what's wrong with this establishment? Donald said, leaning back. We let people hold on to their power for way too long. It's unbelievable. We even praise them for it, which is just crazy. And you know what happens? It creates a different kind of person, a total egomaniac who wants to rule forever. Even when they're unfit for leadership, when they're out of touch with the American people, they still cling to their title like it's gold. Can you believe this? They don't care how many lives are ruined because they can't do their duty. Or worse, they convince themselves that any problem that they create because of their self-serving political agenda is beyond their control, or it's someone else's fault. The agent glimpsed at the irony and then looked away, unsure of what to do during such a vulnerable exchange. Ageism, sexism, racism, these are all the folly of man, he continued. There are some things elderly people should not be put in charge of. There are some things men can do better than women, and it's the same with blacks. But we want to say that everybody is equal when you would take a bullet for me, which means my life is greater than yours. A greater than sign is not an equal sign. That's just math. The agent nodded, either agreeing or feeling forced by his position to agree. I'm just rambling, Donald said with a dismissive wave. I'd say this conversation stays between us, but I think we already know that goes without saying. Yes, sir, the agent said, and then knowing that this was the absolute correct answer, it does, he confirmed. The car turned onto a street where two concrete barriers sunk into the ground. As the vehicle passed over them, the barriers reemerged. The vehicle continued into a building roughly the size of a garage and descended into a tunnel beneath the structure, coming to a stop at the curb where a man in a black suit and sunglasses opened the door. Donald stepped out. Inside the underground facility, the advisor quickly caught up to Donald for a classic West Wing style walk and talk. How long do I have to wear this thing? It's completely ridiculous. It's not like anybody will see me down here, Donald said, touching the bandage on his ear. That little bastard was an excellent shot, but I did not expect that much blood. The advisor wasn't concerned about what was, only about what had to be done. Sir, he has to drop out. It will be chaos if he kept running and actually won. Believe me, I know. I have a chat with him, Donald said. A doctor took the opposite side. As you can see here, the doctor said, holding up an MRI scan, the structural changes in the hippocampus are significant enough to warrant. Donald and the doctor both interrupted with a lighthearted shout. In English, Doc, the doctor chuckled. I know, as Donald added with a grin. I've always wanted to say that. The patient's cognitive decline is pretty serious. So you're telling me he's not fit to run a nation, is that what you're saying? Donald asked. Sir, he's not fit to run a lemonade stand. An advisor stepped forward and handed Donald a leather-bound folder stamped with an official seal. Donald pushed open the door and saw his friend sitting in a chair with a blanket over his lap, peacefully looking out a nearby window. Even though they were deep underground, the scene outside was staged with live birds, trees, and an artificial sun. Joe glanced over, a warm smile crossing his face. Donald, he said. Hey, Joe, Donald replied. Must be pretty bad if they sent you. Nobody sent me. I'm just here for a visit, that's all. He walked over to the bed, unbuttoned the bottom two buttons of his blazer, and sat down, placing a folder beside him. Joe's eyes flickered toward it. You know, Joe said, blinking rapidly, more people will believe you if you mixed up your lies with a little bit of truth. Donald smirked. Joe, come on, I think we both know I've got enough people who believe whatever I say. Joe sighed, his tone shifting. Look, I can't step down. There's still too much work to do. I'm reluctant to walk away from that. Donald chuckled. You know my good friend, Barry, remember him? He told me it didn't matter if he could serve a third term. He said he'd never be able to finish everything he started. Yeah, it's almost like a cruel joke, Joe said, shaking his head. You get in there with all these big ideas, all these plans, thinking you've got time to make it happen. Then it hits you. You'll never have enough time. And the kicker? You've cut somebody else's ideas and plans short just to start on yours. He sighed, his voice turning reflective. We probably have free healthcare and a flawless economy if we didn't zigzag in different directions every few years. Donald looked at him surprised. He was there. He was there. All of a sudden, he was a fully functioning human person. That same human person he had been most of his life, with all the clarity and personality that comes with it. Do you remember your first briefing? Donald asked. Of course I do, Joe replied defensively, his default response. Words like remember, memory, and forget have become triggers for him over the years. He also hated hearing Joe spoken in that soft, pitying tone. That he hated most of all. He cast his eyes downward. Look, he said. He stuttered, sifting through his memory. He kind of remembered the first time he walked into the briefing room. Well, he knew there had to be a first time because there was a second and third and so many times after that. Still, he didn't quite recall the details, but he knew enough to let Donald get to his point. After all, he wasn't going to ask him for the fine details. All the while, Donald squinted at him with his lip in a permanent frog-like frown. He refused to interrupt him, continue, or embarrass him in any way. He would let Joe find the words and complete his thought, no matter how long it took. Boy, Joe said, it was something. Definitely, Donald nodded. By the time they got to the facility, I thought, well, there goes my plans for the wall. Joe and Donald laughed. And then it hit Joe, a flood of fragmented memories rushing back to him in flashes. The briefing room, the top secret, even to him back then, beyond his clearance, above his pay grade. He had walked past this highly classified red door so many times when Barry was in charge, but was never allowed inside until he took over. Can you imagine? Joe said, shaking his head. Taking even a fraction of the energy budget away from those pods for anything else would literally be world-ending. Donald smirked. Did you meet Golgar? I met him once through teleconference. You didn't do the brain thing? What? No, fuck no. You did that? You did the brain thing? It's like the best coke and the best weed mixed with that feeling after some mind-blowing sex, I tell you. Once the laughing died down, Joe had a feeling. Donald was here for something, but he didn't know what. There was a tension in the air. It was weighted with a hint of disapproval, like he had done something wrong or had to do something wrong. It was like he failed a test or maybe he didn't study. Outside, a small colorful bird landed on a branch and began pecking at something. Donald looked closer to see that it was eating another bird, or what looked like another bird. He turned back to his friend, or at least the shell of his friend now, who was staring blankly out the window. This wasn't the perfect moment, but then again, when was it ever? Joe, Donald said carefully, his tone softer than usual. You can't keep going like this. This job, it's tough. You saw what it did to Barry's hair. Joe let out a laugh, but the tension still hung in the room. If you let it, it will kill you. Hell, it almost killed me. Joe's smile faded as the realization set in. Donald was here to try to convince him to step down, before he'd even really started. If he left now, he'd fade into history as nothing more than an interim president. His own words would come back to haunt him, and he would be viewed as a bridge, a rusty, grown-over bridge on the edge of the forest, indiscernible from the highway of life. Joe's eyes became large. He looked as if he were a child fighting off sleep. I'm running, he said. I have to. Donald shook his head. There was no convincing him. Joe wanted to quit. He knew it would be best. Everybody did. But Joe wasn't ready to make that call. He needed someone else to decide for him. But Donald got up, bent over, and kissed Joe on the lips. Joe had instinctively raised his head, but his mind remained tangled in thought as he stared out the window. I'll see you tonight, buddy, Donald said, then turned and headed for the door. Joe wanted to say something, to tell Donald everything would be okay, but pride held him back. He wanted to look strong, so he stayed silent and let Donald leave. Once Joe was left in the room by himself, he felt sad, but he didn't know why he felt sad. He couldn't even remember how long he'd been sitting in that chair or what he was supposed to do next. He stared at the birds, trapped in their artificial paradise. Did they sense something was a little off? Did they notice the color of the shrubs weren't quite right, or did they realize that the natural light was man-made? There was something in the room, his room, that was also a little off. There was one thing that didn't belong. He looked over at his bed, and then he reached for the leather-bound binder and opened it.
It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve you, and while I was seeking attention for, I believe in my business. The fuck is this?
Donald entered to retrieve the forgotten item. Joe looked up.
Donald,
he said, as if he were seeing him for the first time that day. The former tycoon looked into his friend's eyes and saw that he was only partially there. Donald's heart went out the window to be fed to the birds as he remembered his training. He exploited a talent that had gotten him this far. It was something that few people could do. He looked at the entire scene as an opportunity to be exploited. Hey, Joe, Donald said.
It must be pretty bad if they...
Joe, come on. Joe, you haven't signed it yet? Joe looked down at the official-looking document in his lap. Where did it come from? How long had he been holding it? Did you forget?
No, I didn't forget,
Joe lied defensively.
I'm signing it right now.
I'm proud of you for doing this, buddy. The world thanks you.
Well,
Joe said, glancing down at the printed words he was sure came from his mind.
It's in the best interest of the people, and that's what it's all about.
Down the hall, a few key figures from the inner circle waited, including Miss Harris. They heard a distinctive tapping of leather soles as Donald walked down the corridor. He trained himself to move with a blend of confidence and purpose, making it hard to tell if the tapping signaled success or if it was the sound of failure. Donald rounded the corner holding the leather-bound folder. True to his showman nature, he paused for dramatic effect while the small crowd held its breath. He extended his hand toward Miss Harris. Congratulations, he said. A celebration erupted. What? Fuck yeah! Fuck yeah! Miss Harris exclaimed as she slapped Donald's hand away and gave him a great big hug. Woo! She pulled away from Donald and began rattling off an impromptu list to her right-hand woman. All right. Get started on a press conference. We need ads. We need them fast. Gather the committee. No, scratch that. Better yet, make sure my current duties are still front and center. Let's not make it look like I'm sidelining my existing responsibilities just for a promotion. The assistant scribbled everything down vigorously on her tablet. Oh, fuck, she said. The 500 million. Where the fuck are we gonna get? I got you, Donald said solemnly. I think I have that in a shoebox somewhere. He tried to force a smile. It was strange to see this powerful man so humbled by the situation. He could hardly keep eye contact with her. She read the room and lowered her energy level. Hey, she said gently. You know this is the best thing for him. I know, he replied. Come on, Miss Harris said. Drinks are on me. No, Donald said, handing the folder to her assistant. You've got more work ahead of you than you've ever had in your entire life, trust me. He started to walk away, adding with a wave, You still gotta beat me. And Rob, she called back, drawing genuine laughter from her yes men and women.